Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Hey,
Hey, Noah.
sorry I'm a bit late here. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. How you doing, man? How you feeling?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Just sitting here writing the preface to my book. Yeah, what's up?
Thanks for coming over Saturday.
Oh, yeah, it was fun.
You said you were doing a preface to your book?
Yeah. I'm writing about, how I initially came to Japan and, why I wanted to write an economics book about Japan.
Are you going to become an even bigger celebrity in Japan than you are now?
Yeah.
Once the book comes out?
Maybe bigger, maybe the same. I'm not much of a celebrity in Japan.
When do you think it's going to come out?
Probably early next year, I would say. I think we could get it out by January, maybe December, if we really push it. But it requires translation, so that makes it take a little bit longer.
Yeah. By the way, are you a Murakami fan?
I'm not actually. I think he's not bad. Like, I appreciate his stuff, but it's not like I don't go crazy over it like some people do. There's another Murakami named Murakami Ryu, Ryu instead of Haruki. It's a different Murakami, no relation. And he wrote a bunch of stuff in the 90s and 2000s that I think is just awesome.
Oh, good. Well, I'll have to check it out. Because Murakami is the only Japanese writer I've read, but I heard there's some good other stuff.
Yeah, well, now you can read another Murakami, and there's also a famous artist named Murakami Takashi. So,
Oh, it's a popular name. Cool. Well, let's get to some of your posts. You wrote a really interesting one around how sort of boss tweet versus boss tweet, i.e. the Democratic Party has a strong party, the Republican Party has a weak party. I first want to better understand a little bit of the history or even of the reason, like why was Donald Trump able to take over the Republican Party? Is it because the previous establishment, had differing views on foreign policy or immigration or sort of wokeness, or is it something else? Like, why was Trump able to take over? How did that happen?
I mean, obviously, there were opinion shifts. I think that you shouldn't minimize the importance of real policy and issues and stuff. So I think that, George W. Bush and his time in office discredited a lot of the pillars of the conservatism of the previous half century. So I think that, the sort of muscular interventionism, neocon, you could call it, was discredited by Iraq. Tax cuts didn't do much to help the economy. And then we had the Great Recession. So sort of, pure free market deregulatory stuff kind of crashed the economy. I think, and then at the same time, I think conservative Christianity started to lose some force because, people stopped going to church as much. I think Christianity declined as a social force. And so I think that, and also I think the campaign against gay marriage was unsuccessful. It was a big loss, and people realized that kind of the time when that sort of Christian morality could be the enforceable consensus in America had passed. And so I think that all three of those together produced a crisis of conservatism, out of which Trump clearly emerged. But the question is, how was Trump, the people in charge of the Republican Party did not like Trump. And you can just look at a record of all the nasty things they said about him before they had to kowtow to him. How did Trump sort of get in charge? Well, the main reason, everyone talks about Twitter and how, Trump took to Twitter to rally his supporters. And that was true. Twitter was a very important tool for Trump. But also the winner-take-all system of primaries in the Republican Party. So Trump was facing this large field of competitors, Marco Rubio, and I don't remember like Mike Huckabee and a million guys, right? Kasich. And there were all these guys. And then Trump was facing them all, Ted Cruz. And Trump did not get a majority in most states. He did in some states, but in most states he didn't. Instead, he got a plurality. Now, in the Democratic Party, what that would mean is that the delegates would be allocated proportionally based on your vote share in each state. And then there would be a vote at the convention, a contested convention, if nobody gets a majority. The Republicans didn't have that. So the Republicans have winner-take-all primaries, where if you get a plurality, even if you get, 10% and you have, 9 opponents who each get 9%, then you get 100% of the delegates of that state. That's how the Republican Party works. And I'm not exactly sure why they set that system up. I tried reading about it. I couldn't figure out a good rationale for why they were different. But that does mean that Trump was able, with a hardcore of minority support, this hardcore base, he was able to clinch the nomination very early on, avoid a contested convention. And the Republicans didn't have, party elders who were able to jawbone some of these anti-Trump guys, Rubio or Huckabee or whoever, and convince them to drop out early on, right? So Trump clinched it early on. Note this difference with the Democrats. So with the Democrats, Bernie Sanders in 2020 was getting a plurality of votes in a number of states because there were so many moderate sort of candidates. There was, or non-Bernie progressives. There was Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Warren, and then maybe like Steyer and Bloomberg. Like there were all these other folks, and they were splitting the non-Bernie vote. But Bernie wasn't getting that larger percentage of the vote, but it was a little more concentrated. He had this hardcore base. But then the Democratic Party elders. So that may or may not have led to Bernie being the nominee because you had super delegates, right, and you had the contested convention. And so because of the proportional award system, but it would have made the Democrats look like they were in disarray to go to a contested convention. So instead, what the Democratic Party elders did is they went to moderate candidates they thought had a substantial vote share but not much of a chance of winning overall. They said, look, drop out. It's best for everybody that we don't get Bernie because Bernie will lose to Trump. They were right. Well, I don't know if they were right that Bernie will lose to Trump. I think they probably are. Maybe he could have won in 2016, but I think by 2020 that ship had sailed and he had gone like he had lost the whole working class base with, ultra left stuff. And so Bernie, everyone went to Biden, like all the other voters went to Biden. Of course, the Bernie people cried foul. Oh, you rigged it, blah, blah, blah. But like those people who, the former Buttigieg voters and Klobuchar voters and whatever could have gone to Bernie. They didn't. They didn't choose Bernie. It turned out that Bernie was a minority choice among the Democrats. And so, he just wasn't able to win with a minority like Trump was. So I think that's a clear difference in the way the parties work. The Democrats also have super delegates, blah blah blah, who might have voted to had Bernie done well enough to challenge Hillary at a contested convention in 2016. The super delegates might have clinched it for Clinton. So we don't really know. You can argue that would be bad, right? You can argue, strong parties aren't necessarily good. Some people think they're good, but I think that the key is that the Democrats are just a stronger party. They have more control over who gets the nomination, which I think is really the important thing about setting the tenor and tone of the party itself and of the progressive movement more widely.
Yeah. Well, we see in 2024 that, Biden stepped down and there's questions as to who really decided that. I guess for sake of argument, if we assume that he was encouraged to step down by other people and he actually wanted to continue running just for purpose of thought experiment, who actually told him? Like who controls the DNC? Who has the power? Is it Nancy Pelosi? Is it Obama? Is it like how does it work in this aspect?
Well, so there's no official mechanism. No one controlled him. Like he was not forced to step down. He stepped down of his own accord. He was convinced to step down. There's no party.
But if he had been forced to step down, who could force him?
It's not that strong a party, all right. They can't just give Biden the boot. They can talk to Biden behind closed doors and say, "Look, fella, you're old. You got to drop out for the good of the nation." That's what happened. They didn't compel him. They didn't rub the magic orb and control his brain with waves or whatever. They just convinced him to drop out for the good of the party, and he did. And so, who exactly did that? I have no idea. It was behind closed doors, so we don't know. We don't know who jawboned Biden and convinced him, who he listened to. I mean, I could make random guesses. Obviously, a bunch of senators were probably involved. Some probably people close to Biden, like Ron Klain. Who knows? I don't know who was, but the point is that whoever it was, they did a good job of convincing Biden to drop out. Actually, they should have done it a little earlier, but Biden was a little stubborn. He hung on a little longer than he should have, but because ultimately there was no way to compel him or force him to drop out. It's not that strong a party, but it's strong in the sense of the institutional culture of being able to convince people to drop out for the good of the party.
Yeah, right. And talk more about how the party or the DNC really established itself. You give a little bit of the historical, I guess, some people say, oh, tech people are trying to take over the Republican Party. Why don't they try to take over the Democratic Party? Is it because it's too strong and impervious to that kind of takeover, or because it's a strong party?
Yeah, right. That's right. Elon Musk or any rich tech guys could give money to the Democrats. In fact, some do, right? There's a lot of tech people who give. In fact, overall, I would say the balance of tech money probably goes to Democrats, not Republicans. Like Musk is not typical in that sense, or A16Z or whoever gives this. Oh, by the way, in my post, I said, that I'd heard some people accidentally say, like, look, if Musk gets elected, and people were like, that never happened. But one of them was you on this podcast, like I think a couple podcasts ago, I think. I believe, it was a couple people who accidentally, said that. But I think there's this idea among tech people, and I think it's maybe wishful thinking, but there's this idea that if Trump gets elected again, because he's old and because Musk is sort of young and vigorous, it will be Musk running the show, not Trump. I think a lot of tech people sort of hope for that, but I don't know if that's necessarily true, because Trump is not the, even in the winter of his life, Trump is not the kind of guy to play second fiddle. And you've seen the viral image of like Trump like sort of glaring at Musk as Musk is like jumping in the air, like
that's my autistic son or something. I saw the
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, that's, Trump is not, he doesn't want to be a puppet president. He still has he may be old and rambly and, but he still has the volition to, I don't know if things are going to go quite as smoothly for the tech, for Musk and Vivek and the other tech right people who are sort of have attached themselves to Trump and clearly hope to be very influential in his administration. I don't know if that's going to really happen as much, because like if you look at Trump's first administration, all the people who thought the same thing got pushed out, right? Like Bannon got totally excommunicated. Like I guess Lighthizer was stayed important, but then like a lot of people like Mattis, McMaster, Esper, Pompeo, a lot of these guys in Trump's first administration thought like that we can control and influence this administration, that Trump's our man, Trump is a figurehead, a populist figurehead, and will run the show. And to some degree they were right. Like there were cases in which that happened, right? Like Pompeo really changed our policy toward China a lot, I think. And like some of these people got stuff done, but in the end, Trump had to be alpha. He had to be top dog. And he could just fire people, and then he could yell to his populist base. He could yell like this person sucks, and then they would be excommunicated, like people turned on Bannon, right? So that's I don't know that that's going to happen to Musk and Vivek and whoever tech guys think come in and think the same thing. Maybe this time is different. Maybe Trump's so old now that they can control him, right? I don't know. Like Trump is not the kind of guy who likes that kind of thing. He loves to be alpha dog, and maybe that's the only thing he has really left going on upstairs is just the alpha urge. Is really the last thing that's left. And yeah, anyway, so I think that's question. But this just couldn't happen in the Democratic Party at all, because it's like you can give money to the Democrats, but they won't be your bitch at all. You don't get to rule Democrat land with just some money. And people have tried, and it just fails. Like you can influence them slightly, and you can be a cog in the machine.
And give some historical background for how the DNC or the Democratic Party became so strong, basically.
Right. So both parties used to be strong. The Democrats were probably always a bit of the stronger party because their coalition of interest groups was more diverse. And so it was the party institutions that held things together rather than a sort of automatic or tacit agreement of values and identities. The Republicans were the party of sober-minded, white, Protestant, whatever. Whereas, which was liberal, then became conservative. The Democrats were always a party of immigrants, and then Southern whites, which later shifted to black people, and later hippies and weirdos, but also of socialists back in the day, although there was a socialist party, but some social progressives. And the Democrats were the party of all these random weirdos, right? Immigrants from a million different countries. And so they had to have a stronger party as an organization to sort of ride herd on that disparate coalition of interest groups. And I think that, so you saw with Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall, very famous example, Democrats used machine politics in cities to win. And that was their history. Republicans built strong party institutions, but I would hazard to say, I don't want to overinterpret history, but I'd say it's almost an imitation of the Democrats. And then so they built up these strong parties, and these strong parties started to become much weaker in the 1968 election, where basically a bunch of hippies went to protest Hubert Humphrey getting the Democratic nomination because he was pro-war, pro-Vietnam War, and the anti-war candidate Eugene McCarthy had lost the primary. But so a bunch of hippies went to protest against the Vietnam War and whatever. The Democrats didn't want to look disunited, so they got Mayor Daley, who was a big Democratic Party stalwart, but also very mafia connected, to get the cops of Chicago, who were basically the mafia extension, to go beat the living shit out of the hippies. And that was a very famous thing that happened in 1968. And Norman Mailer wrote about it. And there's a whole lot of cultural media. It was the Chicago 7. There's like a huge mythos. It was in some ways the high watermark of the political part of the hippie movement was the 1968 protests at the Democratic Convention. And I have no idea whether that chaos and disunity did lead to Humphrey losing. But it was a close election, Humphrey versus Nixon. So maybe it made a difference. I don't know. But the point is the Democrats decided, okay, we can't inspire this sort of anger and division. We need to make our primary system more democratic. So they opened it up in the old days, like in 1968, there was still a lot of like backroom stuff. It was state by state, but there were a lot of states where like you could be a Democratic Party person, but never get to cast a vote. And so they said, okay, if you're in the Democratic Party, you definitely have to be able to cast a vote in whatever state you live in for the primaries. And they basically made the primaries much more open to Democrats. But as we know, about primary system, the primary system encourages extremism because you're looking for the median Democratic voter, not the median American voter. So what happened now, the median Democratic voter is still relatively reasonable, but going to be less centrist certainly than the median American voter that you need to please in the general election. And this primary system is why everybody's like, there's so many people who are dissatisfied with both choices, because there's no way to select someone ex ante who's going to be close to the median voter. You're going to always have to choose the lesser of two evils, and it's because of the primary system, the two-party open, closed primary system.
And you don't see this changing anytime soon, right?
I don't know. That's beyond my knowledge. I know there's a movement toward open primaries. I don't know if people vote in open primaries, but there's a movement toward it, and that will help. Open primaries would really, really help elect centrist candidates. But anyway, the Democrats have been using their institutional power to push moderate candidates like Biden, but they have not yet. There are some places with open primaries. I'd have to look them up to see where they are, but that's open primaries are the idea for counteracting this effect. But anyway, I digress. After 68, the Democrats were like, okay, we're going to open it up, and then you get McGovern in 72, right? You have this guy. He's not as strongly like anti-war as Eugene McCarthy, who decided not to run again, and he's not as lefty as Eugene McCarthy, but he is the most anti-war and most lefty guy available, and he wins the nomination at a contested convention, in like round whatever of voting, and like the progressives, the lefty anti-war people are 4 years older, they're a little wiser, they see what happened in 68. Instead of just protesting and yelling and screaming, they get really organized and they win. They get McGovern in there. What happens to McGovern right after that? He gets absolutely fucking crushed by Richard Nixon in the most lopsided election in American history. Well, one of the two. The other one was LBJ versus Goldwater. But anyway, he gets absolutely crushed by Nixon. And so the Democrats are like, if the hippies just get to pick their person each time, we're fucked. We don't have someone who's close to the median So the hippies, or the Democrats, decided we can't let the hippies win, so we're going to create the superdelegates. So in the 80s, they create the superdelegate system, which basically was supposed to be this anchor of centrists who get to help decide who they never get used, actually. The superdelegates never really, they vote, obviously, but they never make the deciding vote again, because 72 never actually repeats itself. The Democrats become more moderate. But that's what they did. And so I think that also motivated this sort of culture of picking moderate candidates, wanting to never have a McGovern again, right? And so I think that, and the Republicans made some changes that sort of mirrored the Democrats' changes in some of these, party institutions. They opened up their primaries much more to Republicans, to partisan Republicans, not to rank, centrists or independents. But anyway, so you see that change. So the Democrats, in response to the loss to McGovern, become this strong party that was then able to, that might have squelched Bernie had that become necessary in 2016, but who definitely, sort of boosted Biden in 2020 and then got Biden to step down in 2024. That's how you got there.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Inflation's up or down. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 38,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102.
Did you think that the weakness of the Republican Party was basically inevitable, or the crisis of conservatism that you outlined early on?
No, I don't think it was inevitable. I think that it was contingent on decisions that people made. For example, the Bush could have not gone to war in Iraq. That would have maintained this sort of dominance of establishment conservatives longer. Bush could have, done something about rampant deregulation, the China shock. There's all these kinds of things that we could have done to avert some of these problems that caused the crisis of conservatism. Obviously, the Republican Party's institutions made it much more possible for someone like Trump to take over. But I think that, if there had been wise, skillful leadership by the Republican Party leaders, especially during the Bush years, then we wouldn't have gotten Trump. If we hadn't had the Iraq War, the financial crisis, the China shock, or any of these bad things that happened to us in those decades, we would have had 9/11 anyway. But if we hadn't had those other things, I don't think Trump would have been elected. I think we would have still thought of him as a buffoonish reality show host, and he would have gone to his grave as such.
Wow. Alternative timeline. Could have had Mitt Romney or something.
Yeah. Lesson, don't be dumb.
Yeah. And so after Trump, let's say Trump dies in the next 4 years, although it seems like he's going to live for a long time. I don't know. What do you think Trumpism just lives on in the form of Vivek or Vance rather? Like what is the future of the Republican Party?
I don't know, because Musk has money, but he can never run for president. I don't think he would want to. He'll be a kingmaker like William Hanna. If that name doesn't immediately ring a bell, he's this rich guy around the turn of the 20th century, who he was big into supporting, like McKinley. He was big into supporting, like basically sort of a Republican Party rich guy kingmaker. What Japanese people would call a kuromaku. That's the word for like kingmaker. And so I think that's what Elon would like to be. More insulting word is oligarch, but I don't think that's necessarily applicable in America's system. But I don't think, Vance is not. People, he's not super, super likable to the general public. He's awkward.
Right. But could you see, but how about ideas wise? Like, could you see a neoconservatism coming back in any real way? Or do you think that the sort of bucket of policies that Trump represents, maybe in foreign policy and immigration and some of these other topics, sort of, now represents the new sort of Republican, demographic?
Some yes, some no. So I think anti-immigration, absolutely yes. That will remain a pillar of the Republican Party for quite a while to come, probably for, the next few decades, the rest of our adult life, I guess. That'll be an important piece of the Republican Party. And the conservative movement, the era of pro-immigration Republicans, which lasted from Reagan through Bush, is over. Now, I think that also, I got to say, I think they're going to win in most ways. They're going to think they lost, but they're going to win, just like the hippies, right? The hippies won so much, but they went to their graves thinking they lost everything because it didn't happen the way they expected, right? We're not going to have another immigration ban like basically 1919 and 1924. We had those two laws, which basically heavily restricted all immigration to almost nothing, and then just basically banned non-Western European immigration. That'll never happen again. We'll never get that. What we will get is a whole lot of, various restrictions, making it very hard to get into the country if you don't come as like a high-skilled worker or with very clear, close family connections. I think we're going to get that, and we'll continue to have immigration because we can't quite give it up. But I think we're going to become much more Fortress America in terms of none of this, people crossing illegally to like get asylum and blah, blah. We'll change that law. In fact, Kamala Harris called for the change of that law in an interview the other day, which is something Trump never even did. Trump probably would sign that, but Trump never actually called for it because I don't think he was interested enough to find the root of the problem. So Kamala actually called for the revision of the law that grants you the right to an asylum hearing even if you cross illegally. And so that's going to be probably going to happen at some point. I'll keep writing about it. I want it to happen. And I'm a big pro-immigration guy, but I want that to happen. But then, we're going to reduce asylum and probably reduce formal refugees too, resettled refugees. And we'll just reduce a whole bunch of like mass immigration, low skilled immigration things. And then we'll keep high skilled immigration. I don't think we may expand it. I mean, we should expand it. And hopefully I would be absolutely happy with a compromise where we restrict all the other stuff and expand high skilled immigration to match because, that will be better for the average American economically. But then, of course, progressives will just scream their heads off like, oh, you think high skilled people are more valuable than other people? Economically speaking, of course they are. Like culturally speaking, I'm not judging, but like economically speaking, yeah, absolutely. And so I think we're going to become much more restrictive and much more sort of skill biased in our immigration system instead of doing the 1924, racist thing. We're not going to do that. Although, Trump people would love to do that, but they won't get a chance to do that. But Democrats will basically throw, the sort of uncontrolled mass immigration under the bus. They will. And they've done it before. Like Clinton signed a law banning immigrants from getting, including legal immigrants, most federal welfare benefits. And I think we'll have follow-ups where we restrict state and local benefits to immigrants. I think that's going to happen. You saw Vivek tweeting about that. I think we did it before, we'll do it again. Stuff we did before, we'll do again. And I think I don't think we'll have mass deportation sweeps. I think instead but see, the thing that would actually work for mass deportation is just monitoring labor laws, like enforcing labor laws. But of course, Republicans don't necessarily want to do that. But if you go and say like, hey, you paying all your workers minimum wage? Let's check. You don't have to check anyone's immigration status or papers, please, or whatever. But you can't, there's no reason to employ illegal immigrants, if you can treat them fairly. Well, there is. I mean, plenty of illegal immigrants get jobs that are treated fairly. But I had an illegal immigrant, fix-it guy at one of my previous apartments I lived in a while ago that would just, he was just an engineering genius, and he had been an engineer in Mexico. Now he's an illegal immigrant in America, just, fixing appliances for people. But so there's those guys. But the point is that if you enforce labor laws, you're gonna really reduce economic opportunities for illegal immigration, and you're gonna get a reduced flow. The lack of economic opportunity is what really stops some of this stuff. And if you basically say, okay, you can't get a job if you can come here, but you can't get maybe you can come here if you can dodge our security, right? If you can tunnel under the fence and you can evade the border patrol and hike across the desert and blah blah, and you can make it to the Mecca of Albuquerque or wherever the fuck, then you can, but you can't get a job. Sorry. Because we enforce labor laws in this country, and then we monitor these things. That's all it would take. It's oh, I could risk life and limb and separate myself from my family and not get a job. No, I won't come. So then people will stop coming. But obviously, so I think that Democrats will actually push for some of that as a means of immigration restriction, as a way of compromising, basically saying we're going to restrict immigration, but we're going to do it by making poor people get paid more. And I'll support that. That's a Bernie Sanders thing that Bernie Sanders would do. And I'll support that. And yeah, so yeah, it was funny, Mike Solana the other day was ranting about how illegal immigrants working for sub-minimum wage are slaves. Well, they're not slaves. They risk life and limb to do those jobs, right? And all you have to do to take away that economic opportunity to make sure that they and anyone gets paid more is enforce labor law. Just enforce the minimum wage laws. And he didn't want to do that. He doesn't want to enforce the minimum wage laws. He wants to do mass deportation because mass deportation makes people feel like they're powerful and in control. Whereas enforcing labor laws, makes it feel like we're not this nation that can mass deport. People want to do mass deportation because they want to believe and they want to know in their minds that we are a nation that's politically and socially and culturally capable of doing a mass deportation. They want to do it to show we can do it. It's like climbing a mountain or like, running your personal best or whatever. That's why they want to do it. I can come up with a whole bunch of stuff that will get illegal immigrants out of the country en masse without that. But they don't want any of that because it won't make them feel strong.
Right. And also, it seems like a lot of people are really scared about this, including Elon, this kind of voter importing scheme, or what they see is what they're calling a voter importing scheme, although it seems hard to understand how getting a bunch of illegal immigrants, who can't vote will lead to more Democrat voters, especially when immigrants themselves, seem to be turning more right in some ways, at least Hispanics.
Right. So that's interesting because, from the early 1800s through the early 1900s, all of the Democrats' opponents started off as Federalists, then Whigs, then Republicans. The Democrats were always the party of immigrants, okay? At first they were the party of Irish immigrants, and then they were the party of, Swedish immigrants, and then they were the party of Italian immigrants, and then, whatever. And they were always the party of immigrants, later Hispanic immigrants. But then, so everyone was always worried the Democrats were importing votes. And in those days, you didn't have to be a citizen to vote necessarily. And of course, voter fraud was much more rampant when you couldn't check anything. Like the Irish did voter fraud en masse. You could show up from Ireland and just vote 5 times in an election tomorrow because there was rampant cheating. Like the golden age of democracy, these people are Jacksonian Jeffersonian democracy these people are pining for, was also a golden age of voter fraud, politically, organized voter fraud. And absolutely right, the Democrats were importing votes. They absolutely did. And, it didn't lead to durable victory. The Republican, the Republicans eventually won and the Democrats eventually got crushed, but Civil War had a lot to do with that. But the point is that importing votes did happen. It happens much less now, but certainly, like Democrats did hope that Latino immigration would lead to demographic dominance for the Democrats because they're like, look, Latinos vote Democrat 60-40 or 65-35 or something like that. So just more Latinos equals more Democrats. So you had John Judas and Roy Teixeira say this. And then they were like, whoa, wait, oops, nope. Not going to happen. So then they realized they were wrong, and that those crosstabs on polls are not like some physical law of the universe. The idea that Latinos vote. Now, a lot of people come up with this idea that there is, and in fact, I think people on the right I've seen come up with this idea that there's something in Latinos' cultural DNA that makes them want big government or whatever they say. There's not. Like right now, there's this massive boom in small business among Latinos in America. Huge small business boom. Latinos are converging to white levels of income. They're really upwardly mobile. Basically, if you go around saying like Latinx and supporting like sort of fringe organizations like La Raza, and then like basically thinking that Latinos vote based entirely on immigration, you're living in the fucking 1980s. That ain't the way it is. Latinos are like, they're second generation, they're third, they're fourth generation. Like, they're conservative small business people who are upwardly economically mobile, and they're not going to be swayed by that shit. And I think that Kamala is finally starting to understand this. But then until Kamala, like Biden didn't understand this, like no one understood. And partly because the Democrats, like all American politicians, are a gerontocracy, they couldn't really conceive of this idea that Latinos would act more like Italians than Latinos acted in the 80s. Like that ultimately they would converge to like what Italians or Irish converge to over time. And honestly, the Irish are the closest parallel, not even the Italians. Irish people were, initially stereotyped as like having different facial features and different religions, and like they're so alien, the Irish. And then states at the time were responsible for immigration policy. So states had all these anti-Irish policies to kick Irish people out. We never had open borders. We just had state borders, right? And so states like New York was like deporting like Irish people to Ireland as fast as they could. They just turn around and come right back to like a different state and try to sneak across the border. And so it was like this sort of Mickey Mouse procedure because states were not, you needed the federal government to get involved. But we had a ton of Irish people come here. And was it bad? Are you sad? Like people aren't sad because like later on, Irish people got incorporated in the mainstream of American policy and they also started to vote Republican. And so like, honestly, and they went to every city and they got political machines. Like they're much more politically organized and active than Latinos, right? They're a little bit, there's some cities where they're real powerful, but then overall there's no like equivalent of like, Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall and that kind of stuff, right? The Democrats were a strong party because they had diverse interests. And so Latinos are just going to turn out like the Irish. And then, Ronald Reagan knew that would happen. And he said it. He said, Latinos are Republicans, they just don't realize it yet. He's right. He knew. And we continue to underrate Ronald Reagan.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
As a developer, the journey from concept to production-ready LLM apps is fraught with challenges. Dealing with unpredictable LLM outputs, correctly handling PII, and ballooning API costs can all be blockers to shipping your next AI-powered feature. Weights and Biases Weave is a lightweight AI developer toolkit designed to simplify your LLM app development. With Weave, you can trace and debug input, metadata, and output with just 2 lines of code. Weave helps you run rigorous evaluations and securely manage all of your data sets and system configurations, so you can focus on what matters most, iterating and improving on your LLM-powered applications. Plus, Weave integrates seamlessly with your favorite APIs and libraries, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral AI, Cohere, LangChain, Llama Index, and more. Make real progress on your LLM development and visit wnb.me/cr to get started with Weave today. That's wnb.me/cr.
Democrats are the party of immigrants, but it does seem, I remember Bernie Sanders said something of like, free immigration, that's like a Koch policy proposal or something. And I do wonder if it does seem that when Democrats were more the party of labor, that they were more, or less excited about it in some ways. Feel free to edit that characterization. But I do wonder if the Kochs, if they were, more salient today, maybe they would be, never Trump Republicans. Are they basically Democrats? And to some degree, or at least, voting for Kamala, or if they were an Obama-like figure, maybe it was voting for that. And that goes back to why did this kind of realignment happen? And then I know people talk about education polarization. Was that inevitable that basically most people who go to college would become Democrats?
I never know what's inevitable.
Or why did that happen?
I don't know, but it happened all over the world. But I don't know. I mean, the standard explanation is that fertility rates fell because of industrialization, because of the internet, because of modernity, basically, like everything, birth control and education, blah, 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 blah. Everything lowers fertility. So fertility rates fell. And then when fertility rates fell, it meant that immigration was necessary to sustain labor forces. So immigration came and less educated people didn't like that. Whereas more educated people were fine with that, more or less. And so that's the story that everyone tells of education polarization. It's all about response to immigration. I'm not sure that's really the whole story here, because I think, but I mean, it is true that you haven't seen education polarization in Japan because Japan only opened itself up to immigration in the 2010s. So it has not gotten as much, but you may see that in the future. You may see education polarization in Japan. So it could be that this story that is basically all a response to immigration, which itself is all a response to low fertility rates, is true. And that, but I don't know. I don't really know. I'm pretending to be a political scientist, but I never went to school for political science.
Yeah. So going back to the Trump question, we talked about how immigration might change after Trump. When we think about the future Republican Party, do you foresee any major differences on the policy front, after Trump is gone from what there is now, based on what the base wants?
So tariffs, I think. The base is not closely attached to tariffs. Trump loves it, but it is an elite thing where Trump and like a few guys like Orrin Cass or whoever write in favor of Trump love tariffs as an idea, as an intellectual idea. But then I'd say your average person on the street doesn't give a flying fuck about tariffs. And I think that, polling bears that out. And so I think that tariffs will probably be more emphasized by Democrats than Republicans after Trump is gone. But then anti-immigration stuff will stay. Tax cuts will, of course, stay. And because there's, the persistent belief that taxes are taxes on white people to put money into the pockets of black people and immigrants, like that idea will stay. And that will make people want lower taxes, even if they themselves don't actually pay, are net recipients of government benefits. They'll want lower taxes because of that idea. And I think, that's Alberto Alessio, economist, basically said this is why America doesn't have a European-style welfare state. Now we do have a lot of progressive stuff, but I think that he's right that opposition to becoming like Denmark is that people feel that there's many undeserving people. I said it's black people and immigrants, but it's also just like the lazy, the hippies who don't want to work, the losers and bums and druggies and blah, 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 and all the unworthy people who don't deserve their government benefits. I think that the attitude that we don't want those people to get a free handout is so deeply embedded in American culture. And then, a number of Democrats have that idea too. Like Democrats aren't a bunch of bleeding heart, liberals, despite education polarization. Like people don't want the unworthy to get welfare. And that's why we've always in America gravitated toward these sort of kludgy, difficult programs with work requirements and, low income verification and then difficult applications for welfare, is because we don't want it to go to the unworthy. We think there's something really wrong with that. It's not fair. I think also illegal immigration, not fair. People have this distinct sense of unfairness about, lazy people or irresponsible people getting welfare benefits, and people have, and of course, yes, there's racial stereotypes involved in who people think is lazy and unworthy. I'm not going to defend that, right? But I think that at the same time, there's this, the idea doesn't just spring from some wellspring of elemental racism. It's that you start off with this idea that unworthy people who do drugs or are lazy, don't work, blah, blah, just have a bunch of kids and expect the government to pay for it, yada, 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 all this stuff. There's this bedrock idea that those people don't deserve government support, don't deserve government benefits. And then onto that get grafted various stereotypes about which kind of people are scamming the government. So that's what's going on. And so I think, I think Republicans will ditch tariffs. They'll throw tariffs under the bus because they didn't really want them that much anyway. But the tax cuts will stay, and then anti-immigration stuff will stay. And the anti-immigration stuff is the biggest realignment. But remember, I think that there's going to be a de facto immigration restriction, a squeeze on low-skilled immigration in America. And I think that will last a generation. And that during that generation, the descendants of working class Hispanics will, and also like Caribbeans and people like that, like the Haitians that are eating the pets, whatever. The Haitians, the pet eating Haitians of Springfield, like the non-pet eating Haitians, right? Their grandkids and maybe their kids are going to be a bunch of Republicans. They're going to be Republicans, and they're going to be talking about, they'll be black Republicans. They'll be who is the guy who said like the bad guys won World War II, or the guy who was like calling himself like I'm Black Hitler on like porn or something. That guy, like that's going to be the grandkids of these Haitians, right? They're going to be like, look at all these people just like listening to hip hop and like, smoking weed and doing sideshows and not working. You got to work. Like that's going to be those people. They're going to be a bunch of black Republicans and Latinos, like the fourth generation Latinos, third generation Latinos, they're going to be Republicans too. And, I wrote this tweet once. I don't usually like referencing my own tweets, but here it is. So first generation, yes, I'm in America. I have a lawn. Second generation, wait, do I really fit in? Do people think my parents are weird? Third generation, I should connect with my roots. I'll visit Italy and have pasta night once a week. Fourth generation, why are all these goddamn immigrants invading my country? That's what's going to happen. And once we have that, it's not going to be an immigration halt like we had in the 1920s, but it's going to be an immigration shift where mass immigration becomes much less for a generation. And during that time, the Latinos will shift right, which they're already doing, and that's being sort of concealed by the continuous influx of like new lefty voting, Democratic voting immigrants and their kids. But the third generation, fourth generation shift toward the right is we're seeing it, but we're not seeing it as much as we would if immigration halted. Right? There's this replenishment effect. And in fact, this is true at the cultural level too. It's called replenished ethnicity. A continuous influx of immigrants slows assimilation. So we'll have a pause, not a complete pause, but like a slowdown for a while in mass immigration, I predict. And then during that time, the Latinos and the Haitians and whatever will all become Republican. And not all become Republican, but they'll become 52% Republican, at which point people think, you're a Republican now. You're a Republican group because you vote 52% Republican, because we have absolutely no ability to look past crosstabs and see that opinions differ among racial groups. We don't have that ability to see that. But, maybe Black Hitler will help us understand that, yes, there's a diversity of opinion within every group. It's people vote as individuals, not as racial blocks. Like Black Hitler exists. There's two of him now. Anyway, but more than two even. Anyway, but I guess the point is that as that happens, the salience of immigration as a Republican issue will decrease. Just like it decreased. That's what allowed Reagan to be so pro-immigrant, was the fact that from the 20s through like the mid 60s, we had such low levels of immigration. And then all the white ethnics shifted toward Reagan, right? Which motivated Reagan to think Latinos are going to be Republicans, because like all the Italian Americans and Irish Americans and Polish Americans, whatever, were shifting toward Reagan. They shifted. Those were the Reagan Democrats. They were like, blue collar pro-immigration Democrats. And then they became Reagan Republicans in the 70s in California. And then in the 80s, they became Reagan Republicans. And Reagan just thought Latinos are going to be just like that. And he was right. But what allowed him to be pro-immigration was that long pause that we had that allowed the sort of political salience of immigration to decrease. I predict this will happen again.
Yeah. And okay, so that's immigration. What about foreign policy? Do you think they'll have the same sort of foreign policy view as they have now, which is, more isolationist than
that? I don't know, because what we're seeing at the elite level, at the grassroots level, Republicans really do not like Russia. They're not big fans of Russia. But at the elite level, the people who are now sort of, done a hostile takeover of the Republican Party are pretty pro-Russia, or at least anti-Russia, let's say. They're fairly anti-China, but maybe also bribable by China. So there's a lot of weird stuff. The only country that the Republicans of all stripes consistently hate is Iran. Actually, Democrats hate Iran too. The other day, did you see they asked Kamala Harris, like, who's our country's like, biggest enemy? She said Iran. She didn't say Russia or China. She said Iran. Like Romney said Russia. Yeah, so everyone hates Iran. Everyone's pissed off at Iran. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But then Russia, basically all the Vances and the Viviks and all those people just want to appease Russia. Musk too. They want to appease Russia. They're really clinging to this dream that Russia will become our friend, And honestly, after Putin dies, that dream could become a reality. Putin is the dam in that river. He's stopping us from ever becoming friends with Russia. He hates America because of the Cold War. We won the Cold War, and he's mad about that. Like, that's a real actual Hitler comparison that makes sense, by the way. Is Hitler was perma mad about World War I, which he fought in and lost in, right? Hitler was actually a war hero. He was a very brave man. He unlike Putin, who's not a brave man, he's a cowardly spy. But Hitler, would he ran into machine gun fire to save his superior officer. And he was just really mad that they lost that war. And that determined the whole rest of his life. He was mad about World War I. And he blamed the Jews for backstabbing the country. And that's why he hated him and wanted to kill him. And then he just, World War I defined his World War. The Cold War defined Putin in the same way that World War I defined Hitler. And he'll never stop. He'll never stop coming for America because we won the Cold War. He wants to beat the ghost of Reagan, And the Viviks and the Vances don't I think haven't internalized that or think it's not a big deal anyway. And they're wrong. I mean, Russia fucking sucks. They need to be stopped. But and grassroots Republicans realize this. Like, hatred for Russia runs rife. No one in the Republican Party, except for a couple fringe online idiots, likes Russia. It's entirely an elite thing. So I think that will. But then again, so I could say that'll go away, and the Republicans will become more anti-Russia. But then also Putin might die, and Russia might become a more benign force after Putin dies. Maybe not. I mean, they've got this whole revanchist imperialist ideology, but Ukraine fighting is really hurting them a lot. They're losing a lot of guys. Their economy is getting increasingly bad. So it's not, I foresee rocky times for Russia ahead, and whoever succeeds Putin is going to have a heck of a time, sort of holding that together, and may not have the appetite for the sort of international adventures that Putin really strongly pushes. And I think if Putin were not in charge of Russia, they wouldn't even have done Ukraine at all. They just would have had too many problems at home. So I think everything could change with Russia. With China, it's really hard to say, because I think everybody kind of dislikes the Chinese government. Some people dislike China, the country, but everyone dislikes the Chinese government a lot. For everyone from Tim Walz, who constantly posts stuff in support of the Tiananmen Square protesters, to to a lot of Trump's people. And I think, Elon won't say he hates China because he's got factories there. He's got Gigafactory Shanghai and whatever, right? He depends on them a lot for money. And, and at the end of the day, he knows he's a businessman. He knows what side his bread is buttered on, right? He even caved to Brazil the other day on Twitter stuff, right? But so he won't, he's motivated by money like any businessman, but he, I think, secretly does not like China. Like he fears and dislikes them, which is appropriate. Like, I mean, I don't mean the whole country, the regular people. I mean the government, Xi Jinping and those guys. He fears and dislikes them, and I think that is appropriate because I also do. Like, and Democrats do too, honestly. And so I think there's this. The thing is, China always uses what they call sharp power to manipulate. They use money to manipulate people. They're using their control of Elon's factories and their control of Tesla's market to manipulate Elon, or they'll try. I don't know if they will be able to manipulate Elon, but they would like to, right? Jeff Yass gave a bunch of money to Trump, and then Trump flipped on the TikTok ban. That's how China operates. They throw money at people. They're capitalist as hell. That's what we used to do. So we're getting a taste of our own medicine. And that's in the sense of like throwing money at people to get support, to buy support. China's doing that. And I don't know how effective that'll be. But I think overall, like, people realize that China's regime is bad. But the thing is, here's the thing. America can't just stand up to China, Russia, and Iran all at once. We may not even be able to stand up to China on their own. But certainly China, Russia, and Iran, that's like just too much for us to do. And, the question is, if Europe gets its ass together and holds off Russia, which they should, and they need to do, and maybe after the current idiots who are in charge of Germany get tossed out, maybe they will do that. It's hard to say. Poland's trying really hard, and I think France has kind of woken up too. And then a lot of the little countries, Finland or whoever, have woken up. But then like Germany's the big deal. And as soon as Scholes goes away, maybe someone, will come in there who's actually serious and willing to do something and sort of support a defense against Russia. And then we're fine. After that, America can just fuck off. Like, that's what we need to do because we don't have the resources. Elbridge Colby's right. Like, we don't have the resources to sort of permanently. Actually, we should get him on the podcast. I know him. He's a interesting. I think he's a good guy. He gets in a lot of online fights, but yeah. So yeah, I think policy toward Russia is in flux and could change. Policy toward Iran will not change, and policy toward China depends a lot on how skillful China is in deploying their money weapon.
That makes sense. Hey, Noah, can you hear me? I cut out for a second.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can absolutely hear
you. Maybe as a last topic, but we'll get you out in a few minutes. The Kamala plan, you uncovered that. We talked about the Trump plan. What do you see as the major differences between the Kamala economic plan and?
So Trump doesn't really have a plan. The Republicans have a plan. Basically, Trump has three things: deportation, tax cuts, and tariffs. That's all he has. I've written about each of those three things in isolation, and I'll write probably one more post before the election, putting it all together. Kamala has a big laundry list of things she wants to do because she's a Democrat. And Democrats have a diverse coalition of interests and therefore a very diverse array of policies. But if you look at the themes of Kamala's policies, they're very focused on antitrust, deregulation, and then some traditional welfare, Democrat welfare stuff, right? Those are the three things. But antitrust and deregulation are really big, feature really big, much more than under Biden actually. Antitrust similar, but even more, and then deregulation much more than Biden, because I think Kamala has been Yimby pilled. I think basically Kamala's favorite person is Gary Tan, who is coincidentally holding a little tech fundraiser for Kamala Harris. I think that basically the Democrats have gotten the idea that in terms of business, small is good and big is bad. And so I think they're, Google and those guys give tons of money to Democrats, and I think Democrats just do not care. Remember, you can give money to Democrats, but it doesn't mean you rule them. And so I think that they're going to continue to go after Google, continue to go after companies, even the ones that support them. Even, Salesforce is probably safe because no one knows what it does. But anyway, their saving grace is that no one has any idea who they are, what they do. But anyway, Democrats will go after big business and support small business. They have just tons of stuff about supporting small businesses, including startups. They like little tech. I think, they really like little tech. And so of course, Andreessen, I think, supports Trump, but I think Horowitz has given money to Harris. And so I think that those guys, they're a little torn because I think on some macro stuff, they like Republicans in general. They think Republicans will appoint more deregulatory people, but I think they also like the pro little tech agenda of the Democrats. They see that that's in their favor, really. Like, honestly, Andreessen Horowitz could, had they not chosen to support Trump, they could be the darlings, absolute darlings of the Democratic Party. But cultural issues, wokeness is also a DEI companies. Democrats are going to drop DEI, but that's a subject for another podcast. But then anyway, I guess the point is that Kamala Harris's program is very YIMBY, and it's very like promote small businessy. And they'll keep Biden's industrial policies. I think she'll keep Biden's industrial policies, but she's not as focused on like resuscitating the working class and the forgotten places of the Midwest and stuff as Biden was. I think you can see that in her reduced working class support relative to Biden. She has increased support among educated people, reduced working class support relative to Biden. And I think you can see that Biden really just wanted to revive American manufacturing. I think Kamala wants to do that too, but it's not as big a burning priority for her. So, I'm going to have to write lots of posts about it and hope that, the Kamala Harris administration people, if she wins, I mean, it's a coin flip, but, if she's in there, then I'll try to write about that. If it's Trump, then I'll just, I'll spend 4 years writing like, oh my God, we could have had a country, guys. But look what we did. We got so mad about Dem immigrants that we just, elected chaos. We opted for chaos, Anyway, all right. Well, I'll be very wistful and sad if this all happens. But we'll see.
Well, on that note, this was a great wide-ranging discussion on how the Republican Party evolved, how the Democratic Party evolved, and where both might go. As always, Noah, great discussion, and until next week.
Yeah, awesome. Until next time, man.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That was great.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.